You asked for it, here it is, the BMPCC OG versus the BMMCC, right here, right now. Welcome back, everybody. It's fight night here on the channel, and today we're pitting up the original Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera against the original Blackmagic Micro Cinema Camera. Now, these two cameras have been impressive tools for indie filmmakers for quite a while, but have seen a recent resurgence in popularity in the used camera sphere over the last couple of years. They share a lot of similarities from image standpoint, but are also very different in terms of build, use, and ergonomics. So overall, which one's better? Which one's worse? Are they both terrible in the contemporary marketplace? Well, you're just gonna have to stick around to find out as these two legends go head to head. I'm Will Von Toggen. If you're new to the channel, be sure to hit like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Now, if you're not very familiar with either of these two cameras, I suggest taking a quick look at some of my other videos that go over these cameras in depth, but for now, let the fight begin. Round one. Now, first thing I want to discuss are the overall specs. These two cameras were built about 3 years apart and are very similar on the baseline, with the Micro offering slightly more shooting options over the Pocket. Now, both cameras are limited to 1080p HD, which is not a big deal in my eyes, even in a 4K world. After all, most theaters still project 2K DCPs, and 4K over HD isn't very distinguishable on a small screen. With a good lens, it's a negligible difference, and in fact, just for the sake of argument, here's a look at the Micro next to the Pocket 4K. Both of these are sporting the Meiki Cineprimes, one at 25mm, one at 35mm, giving us the same field of view with the crop factor taken into consideration, and both at a T2.8. And here they are, both punched in at 200% for those arguing about reframing in post. I'll let you be the judge. Now, both of these cameras shoot between 200 and 1600 ISO, with the native ISO sitting at 800. Both offer 13 stops of dynamic range, Micro Four Third mount, and a Super 16 size sensor, meaning a 2.88 times crop when compared to a full frame. Both cameras shoot RAW Cinema DNG, as well as ProRes Proxy, LT422, and HQ. Now, here's where the Micro offers something more, which is the ability to shoot compressed RAW 3:1. Now, keep in mind, this is not B-RAW. It still functions just like Cinema DNG, but it uses a third of the space, which is very much needed since the Micro also shoots up to 60 frames per second. Now, this is one of the main selling points for a lot of people looking at these two cameras, because 60 FPS means slow motion, something that the OG Pocket cannot do. Now, the 3:1 compressed RAW also means you won't eat up your storage quite as fast when shooting 60 FPS in RAW, but it still gives you all the flexibility of a RAW workflow. Now, beyond that, Blackmagic claims that it's the exact same sensor in both cameras, and the color and sharpness would support that argument. However, since the Micro is technically a newer camera, that means from a production standpoint, it's a newer sensor and possibly has slightly upgraded features, although I can't back that up beyond my own basic knowledge of component production. Naked and without a battery, the Micro is barely heavier at 0.3 ounces or 8.5 grams. They are the same height, but the Pocket is wider, whereas the Micro is thicker. Given its shape, the Micro will fit and balance better on a gimbal, but the OG Pocket will do just as well given how small it is to begin with. Now, what's the best gimbal for these? I mean, literally any gimbal. They're both so small and lightweight, you can get away with just about anything. So as you can see, at a baseline level of shooting, meaning 24 frames a second in HD, the cameras are almost identical in specs. However, I have to give this round to the Micro because of its ability to overcrank to 60 frames per second and also having the option for the 3:1 compressed RAW. So the Micro wins in terms of overall specs. Round two. Let's talk about build. Now, I just went over some of the basic build notes regarding the weight and shape of these two cameras, but what else is there to consider from a physical build feature standpoint? Most obvious is the fact that the original Pocket has a screen. Is it the best screen? No, but it gets the job done as far as basic framing, focus monitoring, and menu navigation. However, it is quite fragile and also irreplaceable, but this is overcome by using precautions to help shield the screen during transport and use. Now, there are a couple of cages on the market, mine included, that do offer things in a way of shielding the screen. I suggest checking those out. Now, the camera is longer because of this screen, but that means you can use the Pocket without an external monitor attached if you need to, which is kind of an important perk for this camera. The menu navigation buttons are also very different between the two. The Pocket actually has menu navigation buttons, where the Micro requires you to punch the playback buttons in sort of a secondary function format in order to move through the menus. The Micro also has cooling fans, and the Micro also takes a higher capacity, more common battery, the Canon LPE6 6. Now the native internal battery of the OG is rated at just under 6 watt hours, giving you about 20 minutes of use on a full charge, where many LPs are closer to 18 watt hours, so a little over 3 times the lifespan over the internal battery on the OG, and therefore the Micro running with the onboard native LP can last you almost an hour. However, if you're using external batteries, none of this really matters, except that the OG has a dedicated 12-volt DC power input port, where the Micro either requires a dummy battery, a third-party breakout box, or use of the messy and annoying squid breakout cables to run in DC power. Now the same is also true with the Lank triggering, built in on the Pocket but needs a workaround for the Micro, and when built out, the Lank remote is actually very useful for both of these cameras. However, the Micro does have full-size HDMI, which is a big deal compared to the Micro HDMI on the Pocket, which is very prone to damage and is also irreplaceable. Unless of course you're using a secure HDMI cable lock, which will help keep your Pocket safe and free to have a long and happy life. Now both record internally to SD cards, which are very cheap and readily available on Amazon, link in the description, and both have 3.5mm audio inputs, although neither are very good in terms of direct audio recording. So for overall build, it's a very close call, but I'm gonna have to give it to the OG on the basis of it having a screen. Yes, the full HDMI on the Micro is a very compelling point of contention, but having an onboard screen means you can use the Pocket in a much more basic, stripped down way, even when combined with an external battery. On top of that, there are plenty of ways to protect that HDMI port on the Pocket if you are rigging it out and need a monitor. So point for the Pocket, 1-to-1. Round 3. Usability. Now, a lot of the physicality of the build features dictate the overall usability of these two cameras, and as far as a grab-and-go system, the Pocket is by far the easiest, but for larger productions when both of these might be rigged out, they really are just about equal, and considering that you'll be using a monitor for your work, the Micro's lack of an onboard screen isn't as big of a deal. Now, some, including myself, might cite the frustrating menu navigation process as a negative here. It's a bit trickier, but a couple of things to keep in mind. 1, it does get easier the more you use it. And 2, if you articulate the monitor around to where you can see both the screen and the navigation buttons at the same time instead of blindly reaching around, this makes a surprisingly big difference in not hitting the wrong button and accidentally navigating out of the menu. And 3, most important, in most environments, you really aren't diving into the menu that much to begin with. Think about it, and this is something I always preach here on the channel. In most situations, when it comes to white balance, ISO, and especially shutter angle and frame rate, you set it and forget it. If you are changing settings, it isn't often needed super fast, so the menu navigation, while tedious, doesn't really factor into losing time or missing a shot while on a shoot. Now there is also the option with the Micro to add a third-party breakout box, which will give you quicker access to things like the ISO and white balance on the fly. And more importantly, many of those breakout boxes also give you a DC power input and Lank remote triggering, which again, also very useful with the Micro. So that's super. If you're shooting with this camera, it might be worth trying to pick one of those up. But as far as those things go, given that it is RAW you're likely shooting with these cameras, changing ISO or white balance on the go isn't always a must-have in my opinion, because those can always be altered in Resolve later on in your post workflow. So the menu, again, becomes a little bit less of a deal breaker. Now the only time it really comes into play in my mind is if you're constantly jumping frame rates from 60 to 24 frames a second, but in that case, again, you'll be doing it enough, it will likely become second nature. Now the Micro, because of its size and lack of a screen, plus better onboard battery, also means it's much better served as an action cam than the Pocket. You can mount it on a drone, on a car, hide it somewhere. Not only does it fit better in these tight spaces, but you also don't have to worry about damaging the irreplaceable screen or harming one of your connection ports. As a stripped down standalone, the Pocket definitely gets the job done and I love it. But as far as serving in a rigged out capacity for larger production work, in addition to the versatility of it as an action cam, I think the Micro takes this round by a hair in spite of that pesky little menu system. So another point for the Micro. Now I know y'all are getting nervous, thinking I'm about to flip on my beloved Pocket, but I'm a fair ref. I can't play favorites in this fight, so we're just gonna have to move on to the next round, which is probably the one you've all been waiting for: image quality. Like I said, these are supposedly the same sensor. One is inarguably newer, it's a newer camera, and the overall specs are the same. They both produce beautiful images, very unique images. They handle color grading very, very well. And either way, whatever camera you choose, you're gonna love what you get. Now what you're seeing here is a blend of the two cameras. Some footage is pocket, some footage is micro. Apart from the occasional slow motion use though, you're probably not gonna be able to see a difference between the two. I know a lot of people looking into these cameras will read about issues of moire and aliasing, and yes, they both produce that when shooting at certain textures. However, there are workarounds. You can add a 1/8 black pro-mist filter to soften the image slightly. You can change your angle of the shot, or just be aware of what's in your frame. And finally, probably the most important, you can also remove it fairly easily in DaVinci Resolve. I will say this though, the issue of moire is not nearly as bad as you might think. I shot an entire feature with the Pocket, and when the distributor was transcoding it for distribution, there were only 3 very minor shots that had a little bit of moire present in them from textures. An entire feature, 3 instances. And again, those were easily removed in Resolve, and it was not much of an issue for the final release. So while both cameras have that quote unquote issue, it's not a problem in my eyes, nor is one better or worse than the other. Looking at the footage, really they are almost identical. Obviously, if you're in dire need of slow motion, you'll maybe prefer the look of the Micro, as the OG cannot do it, and as a result, the Micro might seem slightly sharper to you due to the nature of 60 frames a second, but for the most part, the image quality really is the same. However, I don't know why, I have no scientific backing for it or actual specs to prove this, there's something about the Micro that just looks more video-like to me in the motion within the shot. Could be nothing, it could be something in the processing of the image, I don't know, who knows, I can't say exactly, but for me in a side-by-side, I just find something a little bit more video-ish with the Micro. So while this category is technically a draw between the two, and my scoreboard's going to reflect that, in my own opinion, I do prefer the look of the Pocket, but both cameras get the point for image quality, as they are both really honestly about the same. So the score now, as it stands, is 2-3 in favor of the Micro. Next, low light. Now, if you follow this channel, you know my position on this, but I'll say it again for the newcomers. I personally don't think a camera should be expected to see in the dark. Let black be black, let dark be dark, and 1600 ISO should have you covered in most shooting situations, and in a truly dark setting, honestly, it's better to underexpose your darker areas anyway to avoid fixed noise pattern. And yes, both of these cameras have fixed noise issues when pushed too far, which is why it's again best to let black be true to what the human eye is actually seeing. And if you're chasing that film and cinematic look, like a lot of you are, remember that film stocks don't go beyond 500, and most ARRI and RED digital cameras also fall apart after that 800 ISO. So don't let the limited ISO throw you on this. Don't let the fixed noise pattern be a problem. Go ahead and crush those blacks in post, or just keep them underexposed in production. So for the sake of this showdown, which is better, they're pretty much the same at 24 FPS. Because the OG can't shoot 60 and the Micro will lose a stop and a half of light at 60 frames a second compared to 24, technically it isn't as good in low light when used like that, but it's sort of a moot point based on the different abilities. So I'm again gonna call it a draw and give a point to both cameras in this category. So to clarify, both are fine in low light, though people who disagree with my outlook will say both are terrible. Either way, it's equal between the two. So I'm gonna give a point to both in this category. Lastly, functionality. To put it lightly, the Micro just isn't as casual of a camera. While it's small and compact, it's not quite as much of a grab and go as the Pocket. You need to build it up to a small degree just to use it. Now this is fine depending on how you plan to use it, and it's also easy enough to do with a good cage, a monitor, and some handles. And to be honest, once it's built like this, it is very nice to shoot with. It feels stable, you have good control and a good perspective of your image. It's balanced, it's comfortable, and you can get a lot of really great material filming this way, but your ability to throw it into a bag or carry it around unnoticed is diminished because of this build. So yes, you can shoot with tremendous purpose. If you're hired to be a videographer for a wedding or an event and that's what you're on site for, it's not a problem. If you're traveling though, and don't want everyone to know you're filming, that all kind of goes out the window. So good luck filming at the Louvre with this. For functionality as a casual compact cinema camera, I would give this round to the Pocket. However, as a cinema camera, both are going to be built out and the add-ons are essentially the same. And if you're really building it, the Micro makes more sense for a build, assuming you've got the proper peripherals to support it. Yes, the Pocket is better for running around naked, but the Micro will also fly better for action use, and when built out, the Micro might be more appropriate for on-set work. So where do we stand? Who's the winner in the showdown here? Well, truth be told, from a technical standpoint, I have to admit the Micro is the better camera. I know, I'm shocked to be saying it as well, but it has superior specs to the Pocket. It's less prone to damage in the field, it has better onboard battery life and a full-size HDMI. It's more versatile, meaning it can be hidden and used for things like drones or car mounts. And when shooting at standard specs, meaning 24 frames a second in RAW and rigged out for production, it's on par with the OG. So yes, from a technical standpoint, the Micro is the better camera that will still give you that beautiful, organic Fairchild sensor look that we all know and love from the legacy Blackmagic cameras. Congrats to the champ. But, I personally still prefer the Pocket. I know, big shock, I do, and for a few reasons, but because those reasons aren't scientific or measurable, I cannot count them in the tally. The fact that for me, the image out of the OG just looks slightly more filmic gives the OG a boost in my book that cannot be counted on the official scale. Because again, it's just my feeling. And beyond that, things like 60 frames a second and 3:1 compressed RAW just aren't that important to me. I don't shoot much slow motion, and honestly, hard drives are so cheap now that compressed RAW doesn't really matter, especially in HD, because 1080 RAW doesn't bog down computers the way it used to. Now beyond that, once rigged out, most of those advantages of the Micro go away. I've got external battery, I've got my HDMI cable locked down and the port is protected from any possible damage. I can protect the screen during travel and use, and beyond that, it's just a matter of hitting record. So in a built-out production setting, all of that's a wash anyway. Now for me, where the OG takes the cake is shooting Gorilla. Stripped down. I think this is a lot more important than a lot of people give it credit for, especially when making an indie film, being able to go unnoticed. I noticed this most recently when I was in Taiwan filming at the night markets. A lot of people were staring at me walking around filming with the Micro, and not just because I was a 6'4" blonde dude in Asia. As I mentioned, the Micro in its most stripped down state still requires a monitor, and that makes it stand out. Yes, it totally rocks when it's built out like this, but it causes a scene. The Pocket, on the other hand, might as well be a basic point and shoot piece of crap camera for all that the average observer can tell, and I'm still getting cinema quality footage from it in this state. The back screen may be garbage, but it's enough to work with. It's small and unobtrusive, even with an external battery attached. So while the Micro might be the better camera and gives you a lot of flexibility in how you use it, and I would definitely feel comfortable using the Micro on a paid professional shoot, the Pocket OG still takes the belt in my book. When rigged out, either is a great option for whatever purpose you have in mind, and honestly, the only limit is your own hesitation and fear. So with that, let me know what you think in the comments below. Agree, disagree, neither, all of the above. And as always, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.